From Chicago studios, this is a Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Samana Siddiqui. First, the headlines. U.S. Capitol rioter sentenced to longest term yet. U.S. sues Uber over wait time charges for disabled passengers. 500,000 possible COVID deaths in Europe, cases rising again in the U.S. Over 1 million face masks entered oceans in 2020. Widespread drought in southern Somalia leaves 80% of livestock dead. And Wilson Library acquires Islamic manuscript by Omar bin Said. Our top story tonight. A former mixed martial artist who assaulted a police officer during the January 6th insurrection at the U.S. Capitol was sentenced Wednesday to 41 months behind bars. This marks the longest prison term yet given to someone involved in the deadly riot. Scott Fairlamb pleaded guilty in August to assaulting an officer. He will be credited for time served during the trial. Prosecutors had sought a 44-month term for Fairlamb, which was a far cry from the 11 months sought by his defense team. But U.S. District Court Judge Royce Lamberth, who sentenced Fairlamb, cited the seriousness of the offense in explaining his decision. According to CNN, Lamberth said the attack on the Capitol struck in the heart of our democracy. He also said it was an affront to society and to the law to have the Capitol overrun and the function of government stopped. Nearly 700 people have been arrested in connection with the insurrection. The U.S. Department of Justice sued Uber on Wednesday over wait time fees charged to passengers with physical disabilities. The suit, filed in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of California, alleges that Uber ran afoul of Title III of the Americans with Disabilities Act, also known as the ADA. The Justice Department said in a statement that Uber began to roll out wait time fees for its customers in April 2016 before expanding the policy nationwide. Fees were applied if a car waited for more than 2 minutes at a pickup location. The suit says Uber violated the ADA by failing to make reasonable modifications of this policy for passengers who take longer to board vehicles because of a disability. Europe is facing a devastating winter that could see 500,000 people die of COVID-19. The World Health Organization sounded the alarm over a surge in cases on the continent. Germany saw more than 50,000 new cases daily for the first time since the pandemic began. Would-be Chancellor Olaf Scholz told the lower house of parliament that Germany needs further coronavirus restrictions to combat a record surge in infections and get through this winter. Cases are rising again in the U.S. as well. California Governor Gavin Newsom is encouraging Golden State residents to get their COVID vaccine booster shot before Thanksgiving and Christmas break. A team of Chinese and American researchers have concluded that the coronavirus pandemic is driving a big dump of plastic waste into the world's oceans. Researchers from Nanjing University in China and UC San Diego's Scripps Institution of Oceanography said they suspected individuals as culprits. But they found that most of the plastic waste, 25,000 tons of it, has come from hospitals, particularly in Asia. Separately, one estimate found that over 1 million face masks entered the oceans in 2020. The study estimates that about 70% of that debris will wind up on beaches and most of the rest on ocean seabeds. There are already reports of animals trapped by or ingesting plastic medical equipment like gloves and face masks. The study's authors are urging better medical waste management in pandemic epicenters, especially in developing countries. Chinese President Xi Jinping warned on Thursday against a return to Cold War-era tensions in the Asia-Pacific, urging greater cooperation on pandemic recovery and climate change. He made the recorded statement during a virtual business conference aside the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit yesterday. Jinping said attempts to draw ideological lines or form small circles on geopolitical grounds are bound to fail. The Asia-Pacific region cannot and should not relapse into the confrontation and division of the Cold War era. He made the statement amid growing tensions with the U.S. over Taiwan. This was partially offset by a surprise deal between Beijing and Washington on climate change. A former Chief Justice of Bangladesh was sentenced Tuesday to 11 years in jail in absentia for money laundering and criminal breach of trust. Surendra Kumar Sinha served as Chief Justice for 2 years before leaving the country and resigning in 2017. His abrupt departure came months after a Supreme Court verdict took away the parliament's power to sack the country's top judges. Andalu News Agency reports that Sinha is currently in Canada and has applied for asylum there. He was once said to be very close to the ruling Awami League party, but that relationship is believed to have soured after the July 2017 Supreme Court ruling that gave lawmakers the authority to remove judges. The court's decision was widely hailed by rights groups and the legal fraternity as a safeguard for judicial independence. Afghans in the country's capital, Kabul, are lining up in front of bakeries to beg for bread for their families, despite cold weather. The UN forecasts that around 22.8 million people, or over half of Afghanistan's population, will face severe food shortages. The cash-strapped country is now in a catastrophic economic crisis, with people selling assets and begging for bread to stay alive. The country's existing poverty worsened following the Taliban's takeover in August. After that, international aid halted and the U.S. froze the country's assets. Here's a report by Asad Khan and Salah Farouk, which describes people waiting hours for food donations.
40 years of wars have left Afghans poor. First, the Soviet Union attacked Afghanistan, then came the United States. Today, more than 50% of the population lives below the poverty line. 97% of the Afghan population is predicted to be plunged into poverty by next year. Afghans mostly live on bread and tea, but sometimes even bread is not available. Many Afghans do not have jobs. Those who do have not been paid well before the Taliban took over. Farida Shahzad, a widow, has a job. She is a cook at a school, but her salary is not enough for living. I live in Kabul. I have 6 children. I am waiting in front of the bakery to find bread. I am a cook at a school. My salary is not enough to cover the rent of my house and the expenses of all my children. I'm waiting for the bread here because I have to, she said. The poor Afghans are lining up outside of the bakeries for bread donations. They are waiting for hours in the extremely cold weather. This is happening in the country's capital, Kabul. Here is an Afghan woman, Mava Niyazi. We are not beggars. We are unemployed. Everyone waiting here has economic problems. Here is another woman, Sakiba Sakur, who has been waiting outside this bakery for bread in the cold for more than 3 hours. My husband is disabled. I take care of a household of 11 people. We live in a tent. Here is Matinullah Safiyi. He is a generous bakery owner. We give these people around 50 to 60 loaves of bread a day. They sit in front of the bakery for hours in this cold weather. Their financial situation is very bad. It is like that every day. This scene reflects the situation in Afghanistan. It wasn't like this before. The 40-year-long war has ended, but a new war is making things worse. The United States froze $9.5 billion in Afghan assets. Then the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund did the same thing. Those hurting the most are salaried people working for the former American-supported government. The UN forecasts that around 22.8 million people, or over half of Afghanistan's population, will face severe food problems. This is when the world is closing its borders and eyes from Afghanistan.
Sudanese authorities approved the opening of 2 additional refugee camps in Al-Qadarif state on Tuesday. This is to house refugees fleeing from the war in the Tigray region in northern Ethiopia. Speaking to the Sudanese news agency, Al-Fatih Al-Muqaddam, head of the Refugee Housing Emergency Service in the state, said Sudan is expected to receive at least 500,000 Ethiopian refugees, according to the expectations and vision of the UN. Currently, 5 camps have received at least 78,000 refugees from the country. The UN warned on Monday that the ongoing conflict between Tigray rebels and government forces threatens to consume the future of the East African country. The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs in Somalia said Tuesday that widespread drought has devastated communities in the southern state of Jubaland. It said they have lost 80% of livestock due to widespread drought and extreme weather conditions. A UN report in October said over 7 million Somali women, men, and children are estimated to require humanitarian assistance in 2022. This is due to the devastating effects of conflict, climate shocks, and disease outbreaks. Somalia has one of the highest numbers of internally displaced persons in the world, according to the UN. Close to 3 million are estimated to be displaced throughout the country. North Carolina's Wilson Library has acquired a historic manuscript written by a West African Muslim scholar enslaved in 19th century America. The document, created in 1856, is addressed by Umar bin Said to his enslaver, James Owen. It contains an Islamic blessing and 2 biblical texts, the 51st Psalm and the Lord's Prayer. According to UNC Chapel Hill professor Carl Ernst, the manuscript shows the way in which religion and racism were deeply intertwined in the institution of slavery in America. Ernst is co-author of an upcoming book about Said entitled I Cannot Write My Life. Said was kidnapped, taken across the Atlantic, and sold into slavery in the United States in 1807. He ended up enslaved by James Owen, a politician and plantation owner in eastern North Carolina. Said was famous for his Arabic writings, and 18 examples of similar documents he wrote are currently known. He was also the subject of media coverage during his lifetime and left behind a handwritten autobiography currently housed in the U.S. Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
Our fellow Americans.
Right now, the COVID-19 vaccines are available to millions of Americans.
And soon, they will be available to everyone.
The science is clear. These vaccines will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
They could save your life.
So we urge you to get vaccinated when it's available to you.
That's the first step to ending the pandemic and moving our country forward. It's up to you.
I am what hunger looks like in America. I am an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for the last day of school. Because this may be the last time I'll have lunch.
Till September.
I am a single father of 2 who works 3 part-time jobs, and that's still not enough to put food on the table. I was created by artificial intelligence from faces of the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger.
Feeding America, 200 food banks strong.
Dad, they took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. To discuss the outcomes of COP26 in Glasgow, let's go to Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid. Over to you, Imam Mujahid.
Thank you, Samana. People in Glasgow, Scotland, politicians, experts, and activists are trying their best through speeches at this moment to come up with some solution for the climate change. And across the ocean right here in the United States, there is a Muslim who is keeping the flag of the climate change must be stopped high above. I have the honor of marching with him on the climate change when a big march took place in New York City. Imam Safat Abid Ketevich, Assalamu alaikum.
Wa
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah, Dr. Mujahid. Wonderful to be with you.
Imam Kativich has been a long-time activist for environmental justice against the climate change and is a part of Islamic Society of North America, as well as a community organizer. Now tell us, what is happening in Glasgow, Scotland, which gives you hope?
What's happening in Glasgow, Scotland, and firstly, coming to you from my home in New Jersey, the ancestral lands unceded of the indigenous people of this area, the Lenape peoples, and we acknowledge and recognize their connection to the earth and their protecting of the earth continuing till today. And they are amongst the people that are attending COP26 in Glasgow, Scotland. I'm very optimistic about the COP which they are attending. That's the COP that's outside of the pavilions where the discussions between the nations of the world are taking place. That's the COP that recognized and put forth in the streets 100,000 people on Saturday in the torrential rains and the heavy winds that are characterizing climate change, in which we're all witnessing these very extreme weather events taking place. I'm very hopeful in those 100,000 that were there, all faiths, all colors, all people of the world, and being led by our youth, being led by those whose future is being determined inside the buildings of COP. I'm very hopeful in them. I'm very hopeful in the work, for example, as you mentioned, that the People's Climate March in New York City and Washington, D.C. did leading up to the COP Paris agreements that took place that set the stage for the international action on this issue. Unfortunately, the rhetoric inside the buildings amongst the nations of the world is rhetoric that is even pushing back against including the word fossil fuel in the actual final text of the COP. And it's unfortunate that when we all know, and 99.9% of the scientists of the world agree, the burning of fossil fuels, and that those are fossil fuels which are extracted, production, and the burning of fossil fuels is the major contributor to greenhouse gases, is the major driver of global climate change and the extreme weather events we're experiencing, and the various habitat destruction that is taking place in environmental systems and ecological systems degradation that is going quickly to the point of no return. So I'm hopeful for the people that were on the streets. I'm not so optimistic about the leaders that are in Washington, that are in the various capitals of the world, who need to match the rhetoric with action and with time-defined action and measurable actions that need to take place. And the fossil fuel industry, which is based on the extraction of fossil fuels that were produced by many centuries ago or many thousands of years ago, the death of various species, including dinosaurs, need to go the way of the dinosaurs and become extinct. This is the only way we have a possibility as a human society, as all earthlings on this earth, human and non-human, to continue to exist for the future.
Fossil fuel industry has more people lobbying inside Glasgow than any nation's delegation. So they definitely will be fighting not to include in the word fossil fuel. But do you expect there is going to be a communique? What is going to come out? What is the expected outcome of this thing? Is it going to be a statement? It's going to be a resolution? Or it is going to be another, as there was a Paris Treaty?
On in terms of carbon gas emissions specifically, that each nation had committed to and set their own targets. Those are going to be rehearsed again in the outcoming document. And specific action items as to whether or not those targets are being met are going to, for many, be kicked down the road to the next COP. This is the anticipation of the language that is coming out, will be coming out. The People's COP, which is taking place on the streets of Glasgow, is demanding much more. They're demanding an end to the fossil fuel industry, both in terms of its production, no new exploration, no new fossil fuel infrastructure, and a phased out just transition to a renewable energy future. All of this is possible if the will is there. As you mentioned, the lobbyists are going into the COP via the VIP doors and to the areas where the political leaders of the world are discussing, and their staff are discussing how to try to come up with language and hopefully plans which will lead to measurable fossil fuel reductions in the future. But those who are on the outside are still very pessimistic about whether or not that will take place. They have been denied access, and despite being denied access, long lines in terms of attempting to get into any of the COP venues, denial of visas, especially from the most vulnerable nations of this world. Despite all of that, 100,000 people have showed up and committed to the future. The youth have committed to a fossil-free future, and they will continue to agitate, to rally, to support, to demand this to take place.
China and America are in conflict. They don't quite talk about many things on the same platform, but there was a surprise announcement that the United States and China have agreed to certain things. What are the things which they have agreed to?
I'm not on the specifics of that agreement. What I can say is that China, India, Saudi Arabia were amongst the nations actively pushing for the removal of the word fossil fuel in any way, shape, or form from the summary statement which was going to be issued. In fact, China, as well as Russia, boycotted in terms of their national leadership being a part of the COP, the first week of COP, when we had the presidents, the prime ministers, and the leaders of many of the nations of the world come and speak about what their ideas were for a fossil fuel future, for a sustainable future for all peoples. Those countries were specifically absent.
You have a lot of emphasis on people outside the COP gathering than those inside. You and I are among those people who are outside. What are the things people can do individually which can reduce the impact of climate change on people and the environment?
Two reports ago of the IPCC, that's the International Panel on Climate Change. That's basically the leading scientists in the world. And this report is commissioned by the United Nations in anticipation of the COP, and they recently came out with a new version of that this past summer, is that while major decisions need to be taken at the level of governments in terms of policies for putting an end to fossil fuel production and extraction, and implementing various policies in which there will be a just transition to a renewable and clean energy future. They said it is also important, extremely important, for individuals around the world and communities. And they said specifically those in civil society or civic society, that means religious and faith communities as well, to take their responsibility to alter their lifestyles, alter their carbon footprint, reduce their carbon footprint by altering their lifestyles and their ways of being and living within the world. And that these individual actions are also extremely necessary for two reasons. First, they have an impact directly that we are able to enable, we're able to make it come about. Secondly, that they change the mindset in terms of how we make purchase decisions, what our consumption behavior and practices are, what our consumer choices are. And these can make a huge difference because it is the power of the purse that dictates often what products come to market and how they are utilized and how they are procured. Specifically in the areas of food consumption, something that we do every day. And even our brothers and sisters who are in the vulnerable communities and amongst the poorest in the world from different faiths, even they have to make consumption decisions. But specifically here, we who are in the world in which in what's called the first world or the developed world, where we have access to much resources, much more than we need, and much more products than we need, we can begin to make choices. Specifically, like I said, food consumption, what we eat. One of the big contributors to methane gas release is, for example, the production and the cattle industry. It not only produces and contributes to methane, but also the deforestation, the clear cutting of forest that takes place in order to provide grazing land for livestock. Within the Muslim tradition, we have the glorious example of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in which his diet, and Muslims seek, because of their love and respect and honor for the Prophet, to emulate his lifestyle as being khulukun adim, the best of creation, as so named in the Holy Quran, that his lifestyle was one that was less meat. It didn't have meat as a component, but as a minor component. If we look back to traditional diets within Muslim societies, this was emulated. Meat was never a significant part of the diet. Meat was a part of the diet, but in much smaller amounts. And so we need to develop a following in our daily life and our daily activities of the prophetic diet. More vegetables, less meat. Secondly, we can make decisions with regard to how energy is used in our house. Specifically, we're going into the cold months in terms of heating. Making sure that our home environments are houses that are energy efficient. And there's a lot of simple ways in which this can take place through different types of insulation. People can contact their local utility companies to give an assessment of the efficiencies of energy use within their house. It may not require transitioning to a brand new heating system that is solar powered, although that's probably the ideal. But there are a lot of other steps that we can take to reduce energy consumption in our homes, and also with regard to our transport. One of the unforeseen benefits with all the challenges that the COVID pandemic has presented has been people coming to the realization that in many jobs, we can do it from home. I'm speaking to you from my home right now. And that we didn't need to transport ourselves with gas guzzling vehicles to places of work far away from our homes. Hopefully these lessons will stay with us as we move, God willing, past the pandemic period. And also with regard, one of the organizations that both you and I have served on, Dr. Malik Mujahid, you being one of the former chairmen of the Parliament of World Religions, has just had their virtual convening. And the virtual convening was actually almost no fuel expenses with regard to it, or the emissions of fossil fuels. And it was very well attended, and it was net positive in terms of its not only reception around the world, but also in terms of, and allowing participation from people all parts of the world, but also in terms of its financial benefit. So we're finding new ways to be in the world, even, and therefore reduce our transportation footprint as well. And these are three specific areas, like I said, diet, home energy, and transportation, that people, Muslims in particular, have a responsibility to begin to implement. So we reduce our carbon footprint. We become as those, وَعِبَادُ الرَّحْمَنِ الَّذِينَ يَمْشُونَ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ هَوْنًا, the servants of the merciful, which we all desire to be, are those who walk upon the earth gently. The modern understanding of this, maybe with ecological import, is that we reduce our carbon footprint, and the prophetic lifestyle provides us a beautiful example on which we can do so.
Well, thank you so much, Brother Safat Abed Ketevich, Imam and chaplain and a leader of Muslims in Green Faith. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Back to you, Samana.
Thank you, Imam Mujahid. That's all from our Chicago studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Salam and good night.